You're listening to Scaling Up Services, where we speak with entrepreneurs, authors, business experts, and thought leaders to give you the knowledge and insights you need to scale your service-based business faster and easier. And now, here is your host, business coach Bruce Eckfeldt.
Are you a CEO looking to scale your company faster and easier? Check out Thrive Roundtable. Thrive combines a moderated peer group mastermind, expert one-on-one coaching, access to proven growth tools, and a 24/7 support community. Created by Inc. award-winning CEO and certified scaling up business coach Bruce Eckfeldt, Thrive will help you grow your business more quickly and with less drama. For details on the program, visit eckfeldt.com/thrive. That's ECKFELDT.com/thrive.
Welcome, everyone. This is Scaling Up Services. I'm Bruce Eckfeldt. I'm your host. And our guest today is Kim Bohr, and she is with the Innovare Group. And we're going to talk a little bit about the work she does with executives, with entrepreneurs, with CEOs, helping them think through how to be more strategic, how to break through some of the challenges and the obstacles that they're having in not only kind of leading the business, but growing the business. Exciting stuff. I'm always fascinated to talk with other people that help CEOs, leaders kind of think through not only strategically what do they need to achieve, but how are they holding themselves back and how are they in their own way? Because I find that's typically the case. So I'm curious to have this conversation. I think we're getting a lot of good insights and a lot of good takeaways. With that, Kim, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much, Bruce, for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
So why don't we talk a little bit about just how you got into this space? So what was your professional background that got you into just working with leaders on strategy and about their own kind of mindset and limitations? What was your experience?
So I started off, early in my career, I'd always just had this inherent desire to lead and to have my own business and I was always fascinated with the dynamics of business. So every time as I was young and going through my career, I was just engaged in different aspects of business. And I always like to say I was, somewhat of a student of business, just studying all the different components as I went through it. And at one point early in my career, I got to lead and I was a terrible leader. I did not have good...
Yeah.
I really was. And not because I wanted to be, right? I wanted to be this great leader, but I didn't have good mentors at the time. I didn't have good leaders. And when I went to them to say, hey, I'm not getting the results I need to with this team. What am I doing wrong? They couldn't tell me. And what I realized was they couldn't tell me because they weren't skilled and developed in it. And so it was a real pivotal point for me because I needed to figure it out because I didn't want to have people not wanting to be at work every day, not wanting to go and work towards a shared mission. So it was at that point that I engaged my own executive coach. I had read Marshall Goldsmith's book that is still a classic, What Got You Here Won't Get You There. And it just launched me into this place of this passion of how do I become a good leader, but then how do and I don't believe I don't believe I'm done. Like I believe it's a constant journey of development, but then how do I help others in their development journey as I also have a passion in business and help grow business. So over the years of working inside organizations and having my own company, those themes have always been very much in play. And so the idea of business growth to me is very, very much tied to people and to creating alignment there. And so that's just been a constant theme as I've worked and grown to develop myself. And then obviously, had it as a passion to develop others around me.
Yeah. It's funny. I find that so often that leaders, particularly sort of founders that, the company starts to grow, or they start bringing on a team, they find themselves not really being well trained on leadership skills. I mean, what do you think is not working around just kind of our education system? Guys, why do you think that happens? Or what have you noticed, not only your own experience, but the others you've worked with in terms of just the lack of leadership skills for a lot of these folks that end up in these leadership positions?
It's all too common. And I think there's a couple of buckets. I think one of the buckets is when you're inside an organization, there's still a mindset of promoting based on performance. And so what gets missed is the ability to be well suited for the role. So your performance could be all those technical skills, you're constantly achieving your numbers, But this concept of suitability is really about, do you actually enjoy the needed behaviors that you have to exhibit on a day-to-day basis to do a particular role? And in leadership, a lot of times I think people believe, they can parlay their independent experience into leading, and they want to still have people see them as a peer or as a friend. And it really is quite a different mindset and a very different skill set. And so I think that's one of the big gaps, is that inside organizations, that's still a broken part of that system, that we need people to look at some of that suitability side to understand, well, do people actually want to do this? Do they actually exhibit the behaviors and traits we need? The other side of, though, I see this happening is in the startup community, where really smart professionals, whether they be engineers or something, then have these great ideas, and they can get the funding and they can start a company, and all of a sudden their title's a CEO. And with it feels like they're almost embarrassed to say, I don't know how to lead. Like, all of a sudden I'm now leading an organization, or they just assume they have to, like, these skills are somehow, imparted on them with like some magic fairy dust. So it's like, it's really fascinating, and it's really consistent. So I think that there's that belief of, well, if I have the technical skills, the professional skills to go and start this thing, then this other stuff should fall in place. And the reality is, it's just not that easy. These are all skills we have to develop. Even if we have an inherent interest in leading, it's still a very skill-based experience. So I think that there's a couple of buckets. And I think part of it's about, I think at the end, it's about realizing this growth mindset around, what do I need to learn to just be better and constantly be evolving and growing, so I can impart that on others.
Yeah. And do you have a particular kind of leadership model that you kind of subscribe to, or that you use in the work that you do? And I'm kind of curious how much you feel like there are, kind of core leadership skills that every leader must have, versus there's lots of different ways to be a leader, and you kind of, you develop your own kind of style and approach. I guess how much do you see as being kind of, well, no, there really are a common set, versus, you can be different types of leaders. You just need to figure out what kind of leader you're going to be, and then be really good at that.
Personally, I think the most engaging and results-oriented leadership is servant leadership, where we're really more, our skills are around enabling the really smart and talented people we bring around us on our teams to be their best and to do their best. And within that, I think there's three different areas that I practice, and I consult with other organizations and leaders to practice on. And so the first is around curiosity. We often enter into a situation with an assumption around what our belief system is, or what we think this person's going to say or do. And that really clouds our ability to get to the heart of the issue or the opportunity, or just, really understand. And so if we come at a place of being curious, where we're generally asking questions to understand someone's perspective, it doesn't mean we have to agree with it. It just means we're trying to get this clarity and context so that we can now be on the same understanding and move forward from there. So curiosity is huge, and not going in and thinking that we know what that person's going to say because, of X, Y, Z.
Because we don't. Yeah.
So because we don't,
yeah.
Right. And we don't give people that opportunity. So I think that's one of the biggest ones. The other is you really invest in your team to give them the ability to grow and to fail along the way. And what I often suggest is create some boundaries where they can safely fail, where they can have some independence, and then the guidelines where it's a red flag if you see this, this, and this, come to me. But if you don't see those things, go ahead and make the decisions yourself, or go ahead and, process the whatever it is you're doing forward, because people need to have the ability to build trust, and they need to learn. And I often run across leaders and organizations that are moving so quickly, which is just the pure nature of our business society, that it's just easier if I do it. Well, that easier if I do it holds you back as developing as a leader, and especially as you're becoming, either more senior in your company, or you're the owner of your company, and you really need to be visionary and looking forward. It really, really holds you back to being able to do that, because you're still in this doer mode. And so you really have to develop the people around you to allow them to make mistakes and learn from them and grow and that sort of thing. So it's curiosity, it's building that team around you to really be able to fail safely. And then, the third I often say is about really just recognizing you don't have to have all the answers. And so trying to say, asking questions, but also saying, I'm really not as clear on where we want to go with that. Let me get back to you, and then committing to a time to do it. That's what really builds engagement and buy-in. And so those are the three areas that I subscribe to that I really encourage others to. And I think that the results can be pretty significant pretty quickly.
Yeah. So you mentioned this idea of failing a couple of times, and I'm always kind of curious to dig into this with folks, is how do you differentiate, or how do you sort of distinguish between sort of good and bad failure? I always find that there's always a little bit of pushback of, we should just allow more failure. Like, okay, like I get we should take more risks. We should have more chances to kind of try things and be okay with certain things not working out. But just pure failure, though, can be problematic. How do you make sure that it's helpful failure or positive failure?
Yeah.
What's your kind of take on that?
So two things. So one is I look at failures as a catalyst for growth. So I talk about it as a place like, let's reframe what that word means, because if we only play to our strengths, we don't actually grow in our capacity. Okay. And so understanding that our failures are something that we have to own, that we obviously aren't trying to go and repeat them, but when we make calculations we think are often good calculations, and sometimes they're not. And they don't necessarily have to be big failures. Some of them could be that, somebody sent an email that just had a real heavy tone to it, and it didn't land well, and it, made everybody mad inside the organization or their team. Like that could be a failure of, wow, I read, I was rushing. Like those are little things, right? But they had big impact, and those are things you can correct. So what the first part is, I really look at failures as this catalyst for growth. Specifically, though, I think we can't have everybody just running wild. So there's always guidelines and that we want to give. And so certain projects. So often I say we tend to delegate to our A players, but really then we're not developing a really robust team. And so if we think about what are certain projects we could ask people to take the lead on, and those projects don't have to have the same level of authority. So a certain project might be defined where you can give somebody and say, okay, here's the guidelines I want you to play in, but if you hit these certain areas, come back to me. And I think a big piece of failure, though, is for people then to actually be able to say, hey, this is the calculation I made. This is what I screwed up on. And I recognize now what to do differently or what not to do. And I think it's about people being able to then own that accountability and ownership of what happened that shows a lesson that's been learned, that coming out of it. I think that's really critical. I think if we have a culture that doesn't promote it in that way, or we have individuals that don't view it in that way, then that's a problem. But if we can get people to see it that way, then we just keep building capacity for people to grow and have that confidence to be able to actually make those calculated risks as well.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense, and I think that is a good kind of way to look at it as failure is really that opportunity to learn and grow. So that's the goal of it, or that's what we need to pull out of it. Is there any process that you use, or any way? I just find sometimes the failures are either emotionally charged or complicated, or just have lots of different facets. Is there any process that you use to kind of help diagnose or to review or kind of sort through a particular failure and find the most salient kind of learnings or opportunities for growth within there?
Yeah, when I'm looking at it from a consulting perspective, and I'm really trying to train organizations how to just do this for themselves, I follow a process where I call it assess, align, and accelerate. And what we do is we're really looking at, assessing the situation, assessing, your current goals. So what I like to say is solid strategy will not survive poor execution. No matter how much time we think this plan is going to make us, if we haven't put the time in on the execution side, it's going to fail. And the execution side is aligning your people and your process. And so when we talk about the failures, we look at how well did you do, or how well did the organization do in then operationalizing the idea, pulling the right people together to bring them along the road, helping to say, okay, who's got the real ownership? Do we have the capacity to do these things? And it's the aligning that process around communication and the people around, do we have the resources? Do we have the skill set? Do we have, the ability for people to actually pull this off? And so I use that framework to really help break that flow down, if you will, and to see, okay, where did it break down? Now let's go and dive deeper there. When I'm working with individuals specifically, there's I put a book out last year, and it's a 12-week guided professional journal. And I actually use it inside organizations as well. But it follows a little bit of a similar concept, but a little different. And what we do is it's encouraging people to do some really intentional professional goal setting, but then each week to actually document their successes, their failures, as I described to you, and then their lessons learned from both. And then at the end of each week, it has you do a reconciliation around what failure did I learn the most from and why? And then it goes through resetting goals and some other things. And the whole point is that we need, again, we move so busy in our American society that everything's becoming a checklist. And the problem is we end up disengaging in our organizations. We end up not having the ability to advocate for ourselves as effectively or to show impact. And it erodes our confidence. It also, though, erodes our ability to have buy-in and engagement. And so we ultimately then don't execute well. And so you could see where all this is really connected. And so the tool is meant for organizations and for individuals to have some ability to have control for themselves or as the team around that.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about managing people. I mean, you mentioned this concept of servant leadership and, being there or one of your main jobs as a leader is to help figure out what support, what clarity, what insights does your team need in providing that so they can be successful. What are some ways or strategies a leader can use to help make sure that they're actually doing that with their people? They are providing that, figuring out what resources they need and then providing those resources and helping them be successful. Are there any sort of techniques, practices, habits that you suggest leaders employ when dealing with their direct reports?
Absolutely. So two things. So from a one-on-one perspective, I highly recommend that when you get into the room, you're not driving your agenda. It doesn't mean you don't have an agenda. It just means you're really trying to figure out what's the most important thing that this individual has on their plate. And so there needs to be a dialogue where it's not just you driving your agenda and then they have a couple minutes left at the end, but it's really about engaging to say, okay, what's top of mind to you? And the purpose behind that is really around what's sticking for you, what's not working, what is in your way, because a leader's job is to remove those obstacles. If we're in a team setting and you're having a team meeting, it's really that same idea. A leader's job is to block and tackle, remove the obstacles, and make the connections and the bridge that maybe the individuals, because they're moving so fast, aren't seeing. And so it's really around engaging to say, okay, if we're talking about this from an account-based perspective, we're saying, hey, what's going on with this particular client? What do we want to do? Then it's really bringing the group together, but saying what's sticking, what's a red flag to you? What are you wanting to see happen that's not happening? What can I do? Is there a conversation I need to go have with somebody to unlock this thing? And so that's really a real key piece, because then they can go do their job based on the skill set you hired them for.
Yeah. Yeah, I always find that's a bit of a challenge for folks. I guess, do you see one of the things I often see come up with leaders as they move into these kind of leadership management positions with particularly kind of more experienced senior folks? How do you deal with the kind of the dynamic of wanting to be a friend versus wanting to be a leader and kind of developing a relationship in that kind of direct report process? Is there any kind of guidance or model or mindset that you use or you suggest to leaders to, build a relationship, but also kind of clarify the difference between a direct reporting relationship and a friendship?
Absolutely. I think this is one of the biggest struggles for people, whether they're moving into leadership or they're a business owner and they're trying to balance that. So the key is, and I find that it hits extremes, right? It's either, well, we want to go out and do happy hour all the time and party like we did when we were peers, or it's this, I just come in, do your job, and it's kind of a wall up. So where it really needs to land is in this middle place of bringing empathy into the conversation, bringing the idea of the whole person comes to work. Whether we think we can separate it or not, we really can't. So if somebody's having difficulty, with an aging parent and they're having to spend their evenings, trying to figure all that out, they're going to come in and maybe they're distracted or they're exhausted. And so understanding what they're going through just gives you a human connection, right? And it doesn't mean they don't have to necessarily still deliver on their work. It's just you can have an idea and some compassion around, okay, they're really struggling right now. And then you can have a conversation around, what do you need? Do you need a little bit of extra time to go figure this thing out? What can we do to help you? And oftentimes it's just that human connection that makes such a big difference. And it doesn't mean you have to be best friends. It really helps to build respect, though, because people at the core, everybody wants to feel seen and heard. They want to feel like their ideas matter, even if their ideas aren't taken and implemented. And so that's really, really important. And just trying to engage people in that way on a consistent basis, asking them how their weekend was and how their day was. And I know leaders are like, well, I just don't really care. It's like, well, there's this balance between you need to have some level of concern and care, because people are here to help your business thrive or to help this team grow. And so finding that place of pausing and slowing down to find a genuine way to connect is really important. And it's really around creating a solid execution strategy, quite frankly, around your plans. You could do it in a really authentic way.
Yeah. Well, and let's talk about that, because I think that sort of the execution side is where a lot of this kind of the rubber meets the road in terms of taking all these plans and the initiatives and the objectives and actually figuring out, okay, how do we execute on this? How do we make this happen? How do we operationalize? As a leader, how do you help a team figure out how the individuals are going to execute without kind of being micromanagey and being sort of directive or giving them individual instructions, but yet making sure that things are really going to happen and there's going to be measurement and management around it? Give us some sense of how you do that as a leader.
So there's a couple of different ways. So let's talk about it from a tool perspective. So when I'm working with organizations and teams, I really think data is incredibly important to understanding the makeup and the dynamic of a team. And I even mean a team inside, a service-based owner-led organization. That's still a team. And so what happens is often we assemble a team without necessarily knowing what are the skills and the behaviors and, the suitability side of what this individual brings, so that we can overlay it and create the best organization, the best team that can execute in the ways we need it. And so what I always do is say, let's look at data. And I use some tool that's very focused on predictive analytics, because when you talk about data, you take the emotion out and you take well, he doesn't do X out of the conversation. And you start to say, okay, let's look at the dynamics in the team. So that's one aspect that where I try to bring in and educate organizations and leaders on, to say, you bring some data into the conversation that helps. That aside, to the other part of your question really is around, we still have to understand what our strengths and our weaknesses are and our triggers. So it's really possible to say, somebody could be extremely strong and frank in their communication, but if they can't temper that level of frankness and balance it out with the ability to also be able to be receptive to other information and ideas, that strength can become a detriment to them personally or to the organization. And so from a team perspective, it's understanding where do our strengths and our weaknesses lie, and then what triggers us in a way that if we have awareness of individually and collectively, we can be more powerful. And that's a lot of that's just, even if you don't use a specific tool, you can start to have those conversations and think about, what does this person bring to the table? Do they have skills we're not even tapping into that we just didn't realize they had, or they had a desire to use? And so there is some of that planning to help make some of those decisions. And then it really is about communication. And so often people get told they have to execute, or they have to, this initiative is now on our plate, we've got to go do it. And the breakdown is nobody's told them why. And nobody's told them why it connects to the bigger goal of our company. And then the other part of that is that nobody's told them why their work matters. specifically into that. And that's really key to having engagement, is helping people say, hey, this is what's important. This is why you're tasked with it, and why how the impact's going to make in moving this, this project forward. We've got, a lot riding on. And so those are really the kind of the three different pieces, I would say, depending on what phase the organization's in, that how they could tackle that question.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about the CEO specifically, because I think that while, all these things apply to, CEO as leader, I think there is some uniqueness about being, the CEO of a growth company. What are some other things that you see sort of CEOs struggle with as they kind of move into this growth mode, as the company gets bigger, as they bring in more people, as the operations get more complicated? What are some challenges that you typically see CEOs kind of run into, as they develop themselves, and, strategies or things that you think will serve them better as they move into those roles?
So being a CEO, whether you're a CEO as a business owner or a CEO inside an organization, is a really, really lonely job. You don't have the same level of internal camaraderie where you can bounce ideas off of people in the way where some of the ideas might be high stakes things. You can build your senior leadership team, but there's these nuances where it can be extremely lonely. And so that's a reality, and that's something that people need to be prepared to address for themselves. And so I think the other part is that information will not filter up to you. Feedback will not filter up to you in the same way unless you're really asking for it and you're really, really open to receiving it, and you create that environment, that culture to do so. And so what can happen is, if you're getting filtered information and you think everything's fine, and in fact you've got a team that's really disgruntled or high turnover, or toxicity is building because there's side conversations because nobody knows how to communicate that up, you really start to sink your own organization. And so the biggest thing is to think about, how do you start to invite those conversations in? How do you recognize up front the information will be filtered? So what do you have to do to engage and read between the lines and create a safe environment, in a sense, that people can share that information? And then how do you find, support? And so I know a lot of CEOs I work with have CEO peer groups that they belong to, because they can have some idea sharing, they can have sharing of some concerns, things that they just don't feel they can bring up, but it also becomes professional development for them. So I think that it's such a unique role, and it's a lot rides on that role, much more so than when you're, a direct report of that CEO.
Yeah, those are good ideas. I think the communication stuff becomes so hard when you kind of move into that top role, because unless you've got a really strong board, either board of advisors or board of directors, that is giving you critical feedback, you really don't have anyone you're reporting into, which is, it's kind of nice at some level, but it ends up being, up being a weakness, because you just don't have that person that can give you that honest critical feedback nearly as easily. So
you're right. And the other thing I think that I often see in that role is that a lot of times CEOs are holding on to a lot themselves. And to your point, the communication then breaks down. And so if they're not strong at communicating, or they're not thinking ahead, things that they do share can then suddenly feel like a big surprise and come out of nowhere. And so having strong communication, and whether that's regular all staff meetings, whether it's some type of newsletter, depending on the size of the organization, but having some kind of frequent communication that really sets the tone, that follows a consistent pattern, is really, really important as a CEO, in order to keep everybody feeling that they're engaged and that they understand how everything is lining up and why they're there every day.
Yeah, excellent. I know you've put together some resources for our listeners. Can you walk us through a little bit about some of the tools you've put on your website and how people can get a hold of that?
Absolutely. So what I've done is put together 3 tools, all complimentary, nothing is gated, for your listeners to take advantage of for their own businesses and their professional growth. And so if they go to the innovaregroup.com, so it's THEINNOV as in Victor, ARE.com/SUS. They'll see a tailored landing page there that's welcoming them from the show. The first offering is a downloadable checklist with some feedback, some ideas around why most strategic plans fail and implementing those type of initiatives. And so if you're experiencing any of that, it's a great resource to kind of run through. And then there's some really great tips and ideas of what you should consider if you're experiencing one of those. The second offering is a short, it's less than 10 minutes. I think it's about an 8-minute video. And it gives some skill building steps that whether you're an executive or an individual contributor, you can put this to use immediately. And it really is around a change leadership concept of how do you take somebody through where we've been, where we are, and where we're going when we're trying to get the ship turned, or when we're trying to get people to understand why we're moving in a certain direction or why we're rolling something out. So it's a really great tool that people can put to use right away. And then the third is if anybody wants to have a deeper conversation on the strategy execution work and team alignment, then they can reach out to me through an opportunity to schedule a 30-minute complimentary call as well. And if anybody wants to connect on LinkedIn, it's simply Kim Bohr, Bohr, or on Twitter, it's @Kim Bohr. So pretty easy to find me if you want to stay connected and follow the work I'm doing.
Perfect. I will make sure that the link and the handles there are in the show notes so people can click through and get that information. Kim, this has been a pleasure. Thank you for taking a time. Great conversation. Lots of good details, both practical, but also sort of philosophical, giving people some better mindset and some context around this. So I really appreciate the time, and it's been a pleasure speaking.
You as well, Bruce. It's been wonderful. Thank you for having me.
You've been listening to Scaling Up Services with business coach Bruce Eckfeldt. To find a full list of podcast episodes, download the tools and worksheets, and access other great content, visit the website at scalingupservices.com. And don't forget to sign up for the free newsletter at scalingupservices.com/newsletter.